The sun was warm in the village of Ajimobi, the capital of Umweze Kingdom. The sky was clear, birds flew lazily above the thatched roofs, and laughter echoed from the palace grounds. Little boys and girls were running around, pretending to be warriors and thieves. They shouted, jumped, and rolled in the dust. In the middle of it all was young Prince Obina, the only son of Prince Namdi. He wore a bright red cloth across his chest like a sash and held a long wooden stick like a sword. Today's game was villain and hero. Prince Obina, of course, was the hero. The other children took turns pretending to be the thieves and bad people. But soon Obina began to hit harder, too hard. One boy fell and cried. Another girl limped away, holding her arm. "Get up!" Obina shouted, raising his stick. "Heroes don't show mercy." The children were quiet. Some were afraid to leave the game. He was the prince. If they complained, their parents could be punished. Obina didn't notice their fear. To him, it was still a game. He wanted to win. He liked the feeling of power. He had seen his father act the same way in meetings with elders, strong, fearless, unchallenged. Then a sharp voice cut through the air. "Stop that!" Obina froze. A girl stood at the edge of the playground, her eyes burning with anger. She was about his age, with neat braids, dust on her feet, and a proud look that didn't match her size. "You're not playing anymore," she said. "You're hurting people." Obina stared at her. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. Ever. The guards nearby shifted uncomfortably. One tried to step forward, but the girl raised her hand. "I'm not afraid," she said, not taking her eyes off Obina. The prince lowered his stick. He looked around. The children who were playing had stepped back. One was wiping his tears quietly. Obina's heart sank. He hadn't meant to hurt anyone. He looked back at the girl. She was still standing tall. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Amara," she replied. "Daughter of General Obi." That name made the guards stop moving. General Obi was one of the bravest and most respected men in Umweze. Obina nodded. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice small now. Amara didn't smile. She only turned and walked away. Obina stood there for a long time, the wooden stick now feeling very heavy in his hand. That night, he could not sleep. He kept hearing her voice in his head. "Stop hurting them. You're not playing anymore." And for the first time in his young life, Prince Obina felt something new. Shame, and something else too. He wanted to be better. Not for his father, not for the throne, for her. Many seasons passed after that day on the playground. Young Prince Obina began to change. He no longer shouted at the other children. He began to read more, sit quietly and think deeply. When he passed the village, he looked for Amara, but she was always busy helping her mother or walking beside her father, General Obi, the great warrior. Sometimes she would look at him and nod. That was all, but for Obina, it was enough. He wanted to be like her, brave, kind, true. But inside the palace, something dark was growing. Prince Namdi, Obina's father, sat often with Chief Okoro, a rich man who had land, cattle, and many secrets. The two men would whisper in corners. Their faces were always serious. Servants who passed by would lower their heads and move quickly. One evening, Obina walked into the council room by mistake. His father and Chief Okoro were standing by a map. "Soon," Chief Okoro was saying, "you will no longer bow to your brother. The kingdom will be yours." Obina stepped back silently. Something felt wrong, cold. He didn't understand everything, but he could feel it. His father was planning something bad. That night the sky was too quiet. The stars seemed to disappear. No wind, no songs, only the sound of boots, soldiers moving in secret. Then it began. Screams, fire, metal clashing against metal. Obina woke up to shouting and hurried steps. He rushed to the window and saw soldiers in black entering the king's quarters. The palace guards were fighting, but they were falling. He turned and ran through the hallway, calling out, "Uncle, uncle," but no one answered. He found his mother hiding with the servants. Her face was pale with fear. "Where's father?" Obina asked. She didn't speak. Then a guard pulled him away. "Stay hidden, my prince." In another part of the palace, General Obi stood at the gate to the royal chamber, sword in hand, face covered in blood. He was protecting the king with all his strength. But there were too many enemies. He fought like a lion, but a spear pierced his side. He fell to the ground. "Obiora," he called out weakly. His son Obiora came running. He was just 16, but he had trained hard. His hands trembled as he held his father's arm. General Obi took a deep breath, his voice low. "Listen to me. Take Amara. Protect her. Run." But father, promise me, Obiora." Tears ran down the boy's face. "I promise." With that, General Obi closed his eyes, his hand falling limp. Obiora wanted to scream, but there was no time. He turned and ran, searching for Amara through the smoke and shouting. He found her hiding behind the yam barn, her face streaked with tears. She didn't ask questions when he grabbed her hand. "We must go. Now." They ran into the forest, the night swallowing them whole. Back in the palace, the king was dead. Obina's uncle had fallen, and Prince Namdi sat on the royal stool. His face was calm. He looked around the throne room, now quiet. "Let the kingdom rise," he said. Beside him, Chief Okoro smiled. But Obina stood in the corner, shaking. He had seen the blood, heard the screams, watched men die. And worst of all, he had seen his father smile. Meanwhile, far from the palace, the moon was high in the sky, pale and silent, as Obiora and Amara ran through the tall grass. Behind them, the sound of boots grew louder. Palace guards, the same men who once bowed to their father, were now chasing them like criminals. Obiora held his sister's hand tightly. "Don't look back," he whispered, breathless. "Just run." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't stop shaking. The only life she had ever known had just ended. Her father was dead. Her mother gone. Their house burning. And now, they were being hunted. They reached the edge of the Umuzi forest, thick and dark, full of shadows. "We'll rest here," Obiora said, guiding her to a tree. "Just for a moment." But as they sat, they heard the low sound of dogs barking. "They're close." Obiora looked around quickly. Then he turned to his sister and knelt in front of her. "Amara," he said, "you must hide. They're after me too." "No," she cried, holding his shirt. "I won't leave you." "You have to. If they find us together, they'll kill you too. You're a girl. You have a chance." Tears spilled from her eyes. "But what if I never see you again?" He touched her cheek gently. "You will. I promise. Remember the bridge near the big tree, by the river?" She nodded slowly, her hands still trembling. "I'll meet you there," he said. "Every month on the first day. Wait for me." He helped her crawl under a pile of dry leaves and branches. "Don't move, don't make a sound," he said. Then he stood up, picked up a stick to look like a weapon, and ran toward the barking. "I'm over here," he shouted into the night. The guards heard him and turned. Amara lay there frozen, the sound of their footsteps fading deeper into the forest. She waited and waited. Hours passed. Her legs were numb, her face was wet with tears. But Obiora never came back. When the sun rose, the birds began to sing like nothing had happened. She crawled out slowly, heart heavy and lost. Her clothes were torn, her hair was tangled, her face was dirty with ash and tears. She walked until her legs gave out, then she crawled. That was how a farmer found her, a kind old man gathering firewood at the edge of the forest. He took one look at her and dropped his basket. "My child," he said, rushing to her side. He carried her in his arms, whispering softly, "It's okay. You are safe now. No one will find you here." She was too tired to speak, too broken to cry. Days passed. She stayed silent. One evening, as the farmer placed a bowl of soup beside her, he asked gently, "What is your name?" She looked at the fire. She could not say it. If they knew who she was, they would come for her too. "I don't know," she whispered. He nodded. "Then I will give you a name." He smiled kindly. "You will be called Adana. It means father's daughter. It will remind you of where you came from." She blinked, slowly nodding.
From that day, the noble girl Amara was gone. Adana was born. But deep in her heart, every night before sleep, she whispered, Obiora, I'm still waiting. Back at the palace, the throne room was quiet. Too quiet. Obina stood by the tall pillar, his fists clenched, his eyes wide. The red carpet that led to the king's seat was stained with blood. His uncle, the real king, was gone. In his place, Prince Namdi, Obina's own father, sat on the royal stool. Gold beads hung around his neck. His robe was deep blue. His hands rested on the lion-shaped armrest. But his face, it had no warmth, no shame, just power. Obina wanted to scream, to run to him, to ask why, but his legs wouldn't move. Beside the new king stood Chief Okoro, now wearing a long white wrapper and a sly smile on his face. His eyes scanned the room like he already owned it. Obina couldn't believe it. Just days ago, these men were whispering in corners. Now they ruled. That evening, he went to his father's private chamber. The door was open. King Namdi sat alone, drinking palm wine. Father, Obina said quietly. The man looked up. Obina, sit. Obina didn't sit. You killed him, Obina whispered. You killed your own brother? King Namdi sighed and leaned back. It had to be done. No, it didn't. Obina's voice shook. You turned on your own family. You turned on the people. Namdi stood. His voice was calm, cold. Obina, one day you'll understand. Leadership requires sacrifice. We could not let weakness continue. This was for the greater good. Obina stared at him, his heart breaking. You don't believe that? The king stepped closer. You are my son. And now, my crown prince. Obina took a step back. I never asked for this. But you were born for it, the king replied. Obina walked out without saying another word. That night his mother fell ill. She coughed all through the night, her face pale, her voice weak. Obina stayed by her side, holding her hand. She looked into his eyes. Stay kind, my son, she whispered. Don't become like them. He nodded, tears falling down his cheeks. By morning, she was gone. No one knew what had happened.
No one asked questions. The healer said it was a cold wind, but Obina didn't believe it. No one was punished, no guards were removed, no investigation was done. Silence. The very next day there was a big ceremony in the palace. Drums, feasting, red and white dancers filled the yard. Obina was named Crown Prince. The people cheered. The sky was blue, but he felt nothing. He stood beside his father in the courtyard wearing a gold-beaded crown. They called him the future of Umuwez. But inside him, everything was broken. The world he once knew, the laughter, the kindness, the truth, it had all burned away. All that was left now was a name, a title, Crown Prince Obina, and a heart full of sorrow. 15 years passed like smoke in the wind. The once bright palace of Ajumobi was now cold. The laughter of the past was gone. The smiles had faded. The drums no longer beat with joy. And Crown Prince Obina was no longer the same boy. He was now a young man. He walked through the long corridors like a shadow. His eyes were always empty, his voice quiet. He spoke only when needed. The servants feared him. The guards stood straighter when he passed. He didn't shout, he didn't punish. He simply watched. The only time his expression changed was when he stood by the window of his room and stared at the sky. Always looking, like he was waiting for someone who never came. In another wing of the palace lived Queen Ngozi, the king's second wife. She was beautiful, clever, and dangerous. Her son, Prince Chima, was 10 years younger than Obina, but she was always whispering, always pushing. Chima is more fit to be the king, she would say. Chima is gentler, she would smile. Chima is the rightful heir, name him Crown Prince, she would insist. And each time King Namdi would only nod, lost in his own silent regrets. But Queen Ngozi was not the only snake in the palace. Chief Okoro had grown more powerful than ever. His daughter Kamsi was now crown princess. She wore the finest wrappers, gold on her wrists, a crown of coral on her head. But inside her heart was pride, hunger, and secrets. Obinna never touched her. Not once. She would enter his room speaking sweetly, pretending to care. He would turn away. When she reached for his hand, he would walk out. Her smile never lasted. She knew she was just a piece on the board, a rope tying Obinna to her father's power. But Obinna's heart was not in the palace. It was far away, in a memory. He would often sit alone at night, eyes to the stars, and whisper, "Amara." He thought of her voice, her eyes, the way she stood tall in front of him when they were children. But he believed she was gone. Killed in the coup. Lost forever. That thought never left him, and he never moved on. Then the skies stopped sending rain. The rivers dried, the yam fields cracked, the goats grew thin, children cried from thirst. The villagers gathered under the trees, pointing fingers, murmuring, "It's the prince," they said. "It's his marriage," they whispered. "He won't touch his wife. The gods are angry." At first, Obinna ignored it, but it grew louder. It reached the palace. One morning, an elder stood before the council and said boldly, "Until the crown prince acts as a husband, the land will suffer." Obinna said nothing. He stared at the floor, his heart burning with quiet pain. That night, he sat under the moonlight and clenched his fists. He could not love a woman he didn't trust. He could not forget the one he had lost. But the people were suffering. So the next morning he gave an order that made the whole kingdom shake. "In 30 days, he said, every man and woman must marry. No one shall remain single." The people gasped. The market buzzed with shock. "But what of the prince himself? Will he consummate his marriage now?" someone asked. He didn't answer. He simply walked away. Behind him, Queen Ngozi smiled. Chief Okoro smirked. Far from the palace, in a small, quiet village called Eziama, life moved slowly. The houses were made of red mud and dried palm leaves. The market was small. Children carried baskets on their heads and laughed as they ran barefoot through the narrow paths. Here, no one knew the name Amara. Here she was called Adana. The farmer who found her in the forest all those years ago had raised her like his own child. He was old now, his back bent, but his love for her never bent. Adana fetched water, cooked, cleaned, and helped the villagers. She grew into a very beautiful maiden, the kind whose eyes were deep and kind and whose smile stayed long in people's minds. Many men came to ask for her hand. She always said no. She never explained why. But each month on the first day she would walk to the bridge just outside the village. There she would sit for hours watching the water. That bridge was a promise. A place where her brother Obiora once said, "Wait for me." She waited. She waited for 15 years. No one ever came. But still, she hoped. One morning the air in the village felt different. A town crier came with a long staff and a scroll in his hand. He beat a gong and shouted the king's message. "By royal command of Crown Prince Obinna, all unmarried men and women must marry within 30 days. Anyone who disobeys shall face punishment." People gasped. Some clapped, others cried. Confusion spread like fire. Adana stood still, her basket of palm fruits slipping from her hand. She couldn't believe it. "What kind of heartless man gives such a law?" she muttered. "How does another person's marriage concern him?" Old women whispered in groups. Young girls wept. Some families began matching their daughters with any man who was willing. But Adana stayed in her small hut, silent. She had never been in love. She had never even held a man's hand. Now, because of a prince she had never met, she was being forced to find a husband or be punished. "What does he know of love?" she said bitterly. "What does he know of pain?" That night, her adoptive father sat beside her fire. "What will you do?" he asked gently. Adana looked down. "I don't know." He nodded then, after a long pause, said, "You may need to lie." She turned to him, surprised. He smiled. "Tell them you are engaged to someone far away. Just until this storm passes. She blinked. But who? The old man chuckled. Pick any name. Make him a soldier. Say he is away. Adana thought for a moment. Then, with a quiet sigh, she whispered, Chuka. It was the first name that came to her lips. She didn't know why. And that night, when the elders came knocking to gather names of the unmarried, she stood tall and said calmly, I am engaged. His name is Chuka. He serves in the army in the capital village. The elders nodded. They moved on. Adana closed the door, her heart racing. She knew the deadline would soon be here, and her lies wouldn't hold much longer. She looked at the fire and shook her head. All this because of a prince I'll never meet. But fate was already moving. And the name Chuka she had chosen to save herself was the name she had given to the very boy whose face still lived in her dreams. Meanwhile, the palace was quiet again. Too quiet. Behind the painted walls and golden robes, secrets moved like snakes. Kamsi, crown princess of Umueze, sat in her room with shaking hands. Her eyes were red. Her lips trembled. She had just found out she was pregnant. But the child was not Obina's. It never could be. He had never touched her. Not once. The father was Chinedu, the crown prince's best friend, a palace guard, loyal, strong, and now broken. When Kamsi told her father, Chief Okoro, his face turned dark with rage. You fool! He shouted. You carry the seed of a god, not a prince. I didn't plan it, she cried. I thought I could hide it. Chief Okoro paced the room like a wild animal. But then he stopped. A cold smile spread across his face. Maybe this is not a disaster, he said quietly. Maybe this is a chance. Kamsi looked up, confused. What do you mean? He leaned closer. If Obina is gone, this child becomes heir, and no one will question the bloodline. Her eyes widened. You want to? He raised a finger. Let me think. A few days later, the king called Obina. You will go to the rain temple, he said. The land is dry. The people are angry. Go and pray for them. Obina nodded. He didn't argue. The journey would take him through lonely forests and rocky paths, but he didn't mind. In truth, he welcomed the silence. He left with a small group of guards, including Chinedu. The road was quiet. The trees whispered. The prince walked ahead, deep in thought. Then an arrow flew past his head. Then another. And another. Ambush! Someone screamed. The guards drew their swords, but it was too late. Shadows moved between the trees, assassins. Obina ducked behind a tree, heart pounding. Who are they? He shouted. Chinedu grabbed his arm, eyes wide with fear. I think Chief Okoro sent them. Obina stared. Why would he do that? Chinedu looked down and whispered, because I'm the father of Kamsi's child. Silence. The sounds of fighting filled the air. Screams, metal, dust. I'm sorry, Chinedu said, his voice shaking. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted this. Obina couldn't breathe. His best friend, his guard, his brother. I will fix this, Chinedu said quickly. Take off your royal robe. What? Do it, Chinedu begged. They're after the crown prince. If they think I'm you, you can escape. You have to survive. Please. Obina hesitated. More arrows flew. Chinedu pulled off his own robe and threw it on the ground. Let me do this, he said softly. For you. For the kingdom. For the mistake I made. Obina swallowed hard. Then slowly. He removed his red and gold robe and gave it to Chinedu. Chinedu put it on, tied it tight and smiled. Run, my prince, he whispered. Run far. Then he ran toward the attackers, shouting, I am Crown Prince Obina. The assassins rushed toward him. Obina turned and ran in the opposite direction, deeper into the forest. Behind him, he heard a scream. He turned just in time to see an arrow strike Chinedu's chest. Then, his body fell into the river below. The assassins, thinking they had killed the prince, vanished into the trees. Obina kept running. Blood was dripping from his side. His breath was loud. His feet were weak. Then crack! His head hit a tree, and everything went black. He lay still, not as a prince, not as a man with a name, just a broken body under the trees, with no memory of who he was, or what he had just lost. Later that evening, the forest was calm again. The sun peeked through the trees, lighting up the dirt path where a young woman walked carefully, a small basket in her hand. Adana had come to gather herbs. Her adoptive father, a gentle old healer, needed them for a woman who had just given birth. She knew the forest well. She had walked this path many times, but today felt different. Something was off. The birds were quiet. The air was still. Then just ahead she saw it. A body, lying face down under a tree. She froze, then slowly stepped forward. He was a man, young, tall, with dust all over him and blood on his side. His clothes were torn and one of his arms looked badly bruised. "Hello?" she said softly, kneeling beside him. He didn't move. Her heart pounded. Carefully, she turned him over. His face was peaceful, though pale. His breathing was weak. She placed her hand on his chest. He was still alive. With great effort, Adana dragged him onto a bamboo mat and tied it to her back. She was strong, but it took everything in her. When she reached home, her father rushed out. "What happened?" "I found him like this," she said, out of breath. "In the forest. He was alone." The old man looked him over, felt his pulse, and called for warm water. They cleaned his wounds, wrapped his side with leaves, and gave him broth. For 2 days he didn't open his eyes. On the third morning, Adana sat beside him, wiping sweat from his forehead, when suddenly he opened his eyes. Slowly. He looked around, confused. Adana leaned closer. "You're safe. You were hurt. We found you in the forest." He blinked. "Who? Who am I?" She paused. "You don't know?" He shook his head. I don't remember anything." The old man entered the room and looked at him carefully. "Do you remember your name?" he asked. The stranger closed his eyes, then opened them. "No." The old man gave a small smile. "Then we shall give you one." He looked at Adana, then back at the man. "We'll call you Chuka. It means God's plan. Maybe your being here is not by mistake." That evening, as Adana and her father sat under the mango tree, he spoke quietly. "Adana, you are still unmarried." She looked down. "Yes." "The prince's decree still stands. Anyone who is not married will be punished." Adana nodded. "I know." He pointed toward the hut where the stranger slept. "He doesn't remember his past. He has no name, no family. But he is here now. This might be the only way to protect you." Her eyes widened. "You want me to say, he is my fiancé?" The old man nodded. "You don't have to love him. Just pretend. Just until the danger passes." She thought for a long time, then whispered, "All right, I will." The next day, when the village elders came to check the names of unmarried women, Adana stood tall. "I already told you I am engaged," she said. "He is back now." The elders looked at the quiet man beside her, still weak but trying to sit up straight. They nodded and left. That evening, under a soft orange sky with only 3 people as witnesses, Adana and Chuka were married. No drums, no big feast, just a simple ceremony. Only a quiet fire. And 2 strangers with no idea that fate had just tied them together. Meanwhile, the palace was quiet. No music, no drums, only silence. The royal guards stood still like trees. The maids walked slowly, their heads bowed. No one spoke above a whisper. Word had spread. Crown Prince Obina was dead. The king, Namdi, sat on his stool in the royal chamber, his face empty. His crown lay beside him, untouched. His hands trembled, though he tried to hide it. They said, "They found a body," he whispered to his advisor. "Where?" At the riverbank, my king, the man replied gently, wearing the crown prince's royal robe. The king nodded slowly. And the face? The advisor looked down. Unrecognizable. Wild animals had already. The king raised his hand. Enough. His chest rose and fell heavily. His eyes closed, but the tears still came. Not far away, Chief Okoro stood with his daughter Kamsi, whose eyes stayed dry. He smiled faintly as he spoke to the council. My daughter is carrying the blood of the royal family. The prince may be gone, but his child lives. That child should be named heir. Some nodded, others looked unsure. Kamsi touched her belly, but deep down her heart raced with fear. She knew that child was not Obina's. Later that evening, Queen Ngozi entered the king's chamber. She was dressed in full black, her head covered, but her eyes sparkled underneath. She bowed gently and said in a soft voice, "My king, I grieve with you, but we must think of the future. Our people need hope." The king looked at her with tired eyes. She continued, "My son, Prince Chima, is of royal blood. He is ready, strong, kind. Let him take his brother's place." The king said nothing for a long time. Then finally he stood. "I have lost my son," he said. "Let me mourn him first." Queen Ngozi frowned. "But the people will wait," the king said firmly. "Let no crown be spoken of. Let no heir be named. We will observe mourning. 40 days. No more, no less." Then he left the room, his shoulders heavy with sorrow. In the court, the elders whispered. Some believed the prince was truly dead. Others were not so sure. But one thing was clear. The throne now stood without an heir, and those who wanted it were already circling. Back in the small village of Eziyama, people watched Adana closely. She was kind, beautiful, hard-working. Every mother wanted her as a daughter-in-law. So when she suddenly said she was married to a man no one had seen before, the whispers began. Then they saw him. Chuka. He walked like someone who had never seen sand before. He held a hoe like it was a spear. He didn't know how to light firewood, or carry a basket, or talk to elders the right way. And worst of all, he smiled too much. "Is he mad?" one woman whispered. "Look how he follows her around like a lost goat," another said. "Adana of all men, this one." Someone laughed. Children pointed when they passed the market. Men shook their heads. Even when Adana tried to ignore them, their words still stung. But Chuka, he didn't seem to mind. He tried, every day. He woke up early, helped her fetch water, tried to cut firewood, even though he always got blisters. And when he failed, he would laugh and say, "Next time I'll get it right." At first, Adana stayed quiet. But slowly, she started to smile. One day, an old man came to ask for help fixing his broken stool. Chuka looked at it carefully. Then, without saying much, he took a knife, sat down, and began carving. Within an hour, the stool looked brand new. The old man blinked. "Who taught you this?" Chuka shrugged. "I don't know." Another day, a group of boys struggled with their letters under the mango tree. Chuka passed by, watched for a moment, then knelt beside them. "Try it like this," he said, drawing carefully in the sand. The boys stared. They understood. Their teacher stared too. That was the day people stopped laughing as loudly. Adana watched him more closely now. The way he helped children cross the stream. The way he played with little children and taught them how to read. Not everybody in the village could read. In short, the percentage was very few. The way he stared at the sky at night, quiet and deep. He still didn't know who he was. But slowly, he was becoming someone. One evening, they walked to the river together. It had become their small routine after the day's work. The sky was orange. The air was soft. They sat on a flat rock by the water. Adana looked at him. "Why do you never ask about your past?" He smiled gently. "Because I'm here now, with you. And maybe that's enough." She looked down.
But don't you want to remember? Sometimes, he said. But if remembering takes me away from here, I'm not sure I want it. Her heart skipped. He reached for her hand, then stopped. May I? She nodded slowly. He held it, warm, firm. I don't know who I was, he said, eyes on hers, but I know how I feel when I look at you. Adana couldn't speak. Then softly, he leaned in. She met him halfway. Their lips touched. It was gentle, honest, new. The world went quiet. And then, thunder rolled. They looked up. Dark clouds gathered. And after so many dry months, the rain came. Heavy, soft, beautiful. Adana laughed, lifting her face to the sky. Chuka pulled her close. The villagers ran out of their huts, shouting with joy. Some stopped and stared. They saw the two of them standing at the river, soaked in rain, smiling like children. And that day, for the first time, no one called him mad. They called him a blessing. The rain had changed everything. The dry land began to soften. The trees became greener. The people of Eziyama sang and danced, calling it the blessing rain. And when they spoke of the blessing, they looked at Chuka. Everything had changed when he arrived in their village. They no longer whispered when he walked past. Now they nodded in greeting. Now they smiled at Adana, no longer mocking her but thanking her for bringing a strange man who brought the rain. In the quiet compound behind their hut, Adana's adoptive father watched them closely. He was old now and his legs ached, but his eyes were still sharp. He saw the way Chuka looked at her when she wasn't watching. He heard the way Adana laughed now, free, soft, the way she used to as a child. He saw how they moved together in silence, understanding each other without many words. One afternoon, he sat by the fire with a calabash of palm wine in hand. Adana sat nearby, peeling cassava. Chuka worked in the background, fixing the gate. The old man smiled to himself. She's happy, he thought. My daughter is finally happy. He looked at the sky and whispered, thank you, whoever you are, for sending this man into her life. That night, as the stars filled the sky, Chuka tossed and turned on his raffia mat. He was sweating, his hands clenched. He dreamed. But it wasn't the soft, warm dream of Adana's smile. It was fire, screams, blood. He saw guards with swords, a boy with a wooden stick, a girl shouting, stop hurting them, a man's voice saying, this is for the greater good. Then, darkness. He woke up with a start. Adana was already by the door holding a small lamp. She looked at him concerned. Another bad dream? He nodded, wiping his face. Do you remember anything? She asked gently. He stared at the wall. Only flashes, he said. Pieces. A little boy. A girl with fire in her eyes. And something about betrayal. Adana sat beside him. You don't have to rush it, she said quietly. You'll remember when it's time. He looked at her, his heart full. And if I remember someone else, maybe that I am already in love and married to someone else. Her voice didn't shake. Then I'll be happy that you found yourself, even if it takes you away from me and it will hurt a lot. He didn't answer. Instead, he took her hand and held it tight. A few days later, Adana was peeling yams beside the kitchen. She began to hum softly, a tune her real father used to teach her when she was little. A song of peace, a song of courage. Chuka, who had been carrying firewood, froze. The sound. It pulled at something inside him. He dropped the wood and stepped closer. What song is that? He asked. She paused. Just an old lullaby. My father sang it to me when I was small. Chuka swallowed. His head began to ache. That tune. He had heard it before. In the dream. In the memory. His hands began to tremble. He looked at her, then at the sky. Something was waking up inside him. But he didn't know what it meant. Not yet. He turned and walked away slowly. Adana watched him go. She didn't understand what had just happened. But something had changed. and neither of them knew that the past had just knocked softly at their door. The days were calm in Eziyama. The sun rose gently, and the wind carried the scent of fresh yam and firewood. Chuka worked harder than ever. He helped build a new fence for the school. He carved tools for farmers. He even fixed the broken bell at the shrine. But what surprised people most was how he thought.
He always found a better way to do things. A shorter road, a safer plan, a smarter answer. And Adana noticed. She began to watch him closely. The way he stood, the way he spoke, the way he helped others without pride. Sometimes, when he corrected the village chief with respect, she wondered. "Who are you really?" she whispered one night as she stirred soup. He smiled but said nothing. Her heart kept asking the question. One evening, Adana left the house to gather herbs from the forest. Her father had a patient, and they were short on bitter leaf and bark. She told Chuka she would be back before sunset. He watched her go. The sun dipped low, then darkness came, and she didn't return. Chuka waited, first standing, then pacing, then calling out into the night. When the stars filled the sky and she still hadn't come back, his heart dropped. Something was wrong. He grabbed a torch and ran into the forest. Not far away, Adana was struggling against 3 masked men. They had grabbed her by the road near the old footpath. Their hands were rough. One covered her mouth, another tied her arms. "Pretty girl like you," one of them laughed, "shouldn't be walking alone." She kicked, bit, fought, but she was small and alone. Just as one of them raised his hand to strike her, a voice cut through the trees. "Let her go." They turned. There stood Chuka. The torchlight made his face glow like fire. He didn't wait. He ran at them. One came forward with a blade. Chuka grabbed a stick and knocked it out of his hand in seconds. Another pulled out a knife. Chuka dodged, punched, blocked. He moved like someone who had trained all his life. Even Adana gasped. She had never seen him like this. Then, in the middle of the fight, one of the bandits swung a sword at him. It hit the side of Chuka's head. Everything stopped. He staggered back, gripping his skull. Then it all came back. The fire. The night in the palace. His mother's cold hands. General Obi. Amara. Obiora. The coup. Chinedu's voice whispering, "Run, my prince." Kamsi's betrayal. His father's silence. It came like a storm, like rain after dry season. He remembered everything. He was Obina, the crown prince of Umwes. But he didn't stop fighting. He leapt forward full of fire now, knocking one man into a tree, throwing another into the bush. The third ran away. Adana stared, still tied, still breathless. "Chuka." Obina rushed to her, his hands shaking. He untied her. She looked into his eyes. "Are you all right?" He forced a smile. "I should ask you that. You fought like someone trained in a palace." He didn't answer. He helped her up and held her close. They walked home in silence. That night, she slept deeply from exhaustion. Chuka sat by the fire, wide awake, staring at the flames. He was no longer lost. He knew who he was. But now, he had a new fear. What would happen when she found out who he was? And worse, what would happen when he had to leave? The days after the attack passed quietly. Adana went back to gathering herbs and cooking by the fire. Chuka, no, Obina, helped with repairs around the village and carried baskets to the market as if nothing had changed. But inside him, everything had. He was no longer lost. He had found peace in Eziyama. He had found her, and now he had to choose duty or love. He watched her closely, not because he was hiding from her, but because now he saw her fully. One evening as they prepared soup, Adana hummed softly. It was the same tune she sang the night his memory returned. The same tune from his childhood dreams. He stared at her stunned. That voice. That melody. It was her. Later that night, as they sat outside watching the fireflies, she told him softly, My real father once served in the royal army. He was a general, before he died in a brutal palace war. Obina felt his chest tighten. He looked at her carefully, her voice, her eyes, her strength. And now, her story. It was all true. She was Amara, the girl who had once stood in front of him and shouted, "Stop hurting them." The girl who changed his heart when he was still a proud little prince. He turned away slightly, swallowing hard. The world felt like it had come full circle. Fate had brought him back to her. Not as a prince, not as a royal, but as a broken man with no name. And she had taken him in, fed him, defended him, loved him. Even when she thought he was a fool with no past, she still treated him with kindness. She never looked down on him. And now, he knew the full truth. Amara had never changed. The next few days, he stayed by her side even more. He helped her fetch firewood, and even carved her name into a small wooden pendant. She laughed more now. He smiled more too. Their silences became warm. Their walks became longer. Their hearts closer. One evening, as they stood by the riverbank under the setting sun, he turned to her. Her braids moved gently in the breeze. Her hands were folded. He took a breath. "Adana," he said softly. She looked at him. "I know I may not remember much," he said carefully. "But there's one thing I'm sure of now." She tilted her head. "What's that?" He stepped closer, his voice almost a whisper. "Whatever happens, I'll always protect you." She stared at him, eyes full, then nodded. "Me too," she whispered back. "Always." They stood together, hand in hand, as the river flowed quietly beside them. And the prince who once lived behind golden palace walls felt more royal now than ever before. Every month, on the first day, Adana left the house before sunrise. She walked past the farms, past the tall trees, through the narrow paths that led to a small wooden bridge just outside Eziyama. She would sit there in silence, eyes on the river, hands folded on her lap. It was a quiet promise made a long time ago. "I'll wait for you, Obiora, at the bridge, every month." For 15 years she kept that promise. Even when her legs ached, even when the rain fell, even when hope felt like a fading shadow, she still went. And every time she returned, she would smile at Chuka and say, "It's just something I have to do." Far away, in another part of the kingdom, a man with a scar across his chest heard whispers in the market. "A woman named Adana lives in Eziyama," one trader said. "She saved a strange man from the forest. They say he was not well, but she took him in." The man's hands froze. His heart began to pound. Adana, could she be Amara? That name, that kindness, that courage. It had to be her, he wasn't sure, but there was only one way to find out. Obiora, now older, rougher, and dressed like a wandering hunter, packed his things the next morning. He walked for days, following paths only a soldier would know. And on the first day of the next month, he found the bridge. Adana was already there, sitting, waiting. Her hair had grown longer, her face had matured, but her eyes were the same. Eyes full of strength, eyes full of longing. She didn't hear the steps behind her at first. "Then Amara?" a voice said. She turned sharply. Her heart stopped. She stood slowly. Her lips trembled. Her basket fell to the ground. "Obiora?" she whispered. He nodded, tears already falling down his cheeks. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. She wept like a child. He held her tightly, as if afraid she would disappear again. "Obiora," she cried. "I waited. I never stopped waiting. And I never stopped trying to come back to you," he whispered into her hair. They stood there, rocking gently under the morning sun, with the river flowing beneath them like the years that had passed. From a distance, standing just beside the trees, Chuka watched. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply watched. His eyes were full, but his face was calm. This was the moment she had waited for her whole life. And seeing it, he knew it was time. Time to stop hiding. Time to stop pretending.
Time to reclaim who he truly was. Crown Prince Abina, maybe he could correct all the wrongs. The journey back from the bridge felt like a dream. Adana walked with one hand holding her basket and the other firmly wrapped around Obiora's arm. She couldn't stop looking at him. His face had changed, older now, darker from the sun with a deep scar running across his jaw, but his eyes were still her brother's. Still full of love, still full of protection. They passed the tall Iroko tree, crossed the narrow stream and stepped into their small compound. Adana rushed to the doorway. "Papa," she called, "come out. There's someone you must meet." The old man stepped out slowly, rubbing his back. He stopped at the sight of Obiora. Adana smiled through her tears. "This is him, Papa. This is my brother, the one I told you about." The old man's eyes widened.
Then he nodded slowly. "Welcome home, my son," he said softly. "The one who was lost has returned." Obiora bowed deeply. "Thank you, sir, for taking care of my sister. You have given her more than I ever could." They sat together around the fire that night, drinking warm soup and laughing gently between soft silences. Then Adana turned to her brother, her voice quiet. "Where were you all these years, Obiora? Why didn't you come back?" He looked into the flames. "When I left you that night in the forest," he began, "I ran until my legs gave out, but the palace guards caught me." Her heart froze. "I was taken far away, locked in a dark place. I was just a boy, but they feared my name." Adana swallowed. "I stayed there for a long time," he continued. "Then one night, I escaped. I crossed rivers and mountains. I didn't know where you were. I didn't know if you were still alive." His voice broke for a moment. "But I joined a resistance army. We fought to protect the weak, and each time I saw a girl in trouble, I thought of you." He looked at her now, eyes soft. "I'm here now, Amara, and I will never leave your side again. I promise." Adana nodded, wiping her cheek. "I believe you." As the fire crackled beside them, she stood and smiled. "Now, there's someone I want you to meet." She turned toward the small room where Chuka always sat at night, usually sharpening sticks or reading stories to the neighbors' children. But the room was empty. She called softly, "Chuka?" No answer. She checked the backyard. He wasn't there. Her smile slowly faded. "He said he was going to the market earlier," she muttered. "He should be back by now." The sun had already disappeared behind the hills. Shadows stretched across the ground. Adana stepped outside the gate and looked down the dusty road. Nothing. Only the sound of distant crickets. She waited and waited. But Chuka did not return, not by dusk. Not even by the time the moon rose. Her heart began to race. Something didn't feel right. Back at the grand palace of Umueze, peace was only on the surface. Inside the royal court, whispers filled the halls like smoke. Every day, Queen Ngozi visited the king's chamber, her steps calm but her words sharp. She knelt gently beside her husband, voice sweet but firm. "My king," she said again. "It has been months. The people are beginning to ask questions." King Namdi sat in silence, staring at the large carved staff leaning beside his stool. Ngozi continued, "You are not getting younger. If something happens to you today, who leads this kingdom tomorrow?" The king looked away. She leaned closer. "And if they fight over the throne? If war breaks out among the clans, would Obina want that?" The king shut his eyes, pain washing over his face. He didn't answer. Later that day, Chief Okoro entered the council room. He bowed deeply before the king. "My king," he said with a forced smile, "my daughter Kamsi is still in mourning, but we cannot forget that she carries the late crown prince's child." The king said nothing. Chief Okoro pressed on. "The child should be protected, recognized, named future heir before enemies of the kingdom try to take what is rightfully ours." He smiled again, but this time too quickly. The king looked up slowly. "You want me to name a child that is not yet born, the next ruler of Umueze?" "Out of loyalty, my king," Okoro replied. loyalty to your son's bloodline and to your kingdom. Deep down, King Namdi didn't believe Kamsi's child was Obina's. But he had no proof, and his heart was tired. So many burdens, so much pain. And now everyone wanted something. That night, the king sat alone in the throne room. No music, no light, just silence. He stared at his late son's carved name on the wall and whispered, "Where are you, my son? Why do I feel like you are still alive? If you were alive, you'd come, wouldn't you?" The shadows gave no answer. The next morning, the court gathered. The king stood before them, his voice heavy. After long thought, and with deep sorrow, he said, "I have decided to crown a new crown prince." The hall went quiet. Queen Ngozi smiled faintly. Chief Okoro bowed, hiding his joy. The king took a slow breath. "Prince Chima will be named Crown Prince of Umueze in 3 weeks." Gasps spread through the court. Drums echoed in the palace. The people of Umueze prepared for a new heir. But far away in a quiet village called Eziyama, the true prince had just found his reason to return. The following morning, the palace of Umueze was alive with noise and color. Drummers beat their drums. Dancers moved through the courtyard. Trumpets echoed through the tall palace gates. The kingdom had gathered for one reason: to witness the crowning of a new crown prince. Inside the main hall, the king sat on his stool, his face carved with silence. On his left stood Queen Ngozi, dressed in bright gold, her eyes full of pride. Beside her, her son, Prince Chima, stood tall, wearing a red wrapper with coral beads on his neck. He looked strong, confident. The elders sat in a circle. Servants stood still. Chiefs whispered to one another. In the crowd, Chief Okoro sat straight. He wasn't smiling. This wasn't his plan. Beside him sat Kamsi, her hands resting gently on her stomach. All was set. The ceremony was about to begin. The chief priest stepped forward to bless the new heir when suddenly the heavy palace doors swung open. The crowd turned. Gasps filled the air. There, standing at the entrance in a simple brown wrapper and dusty sandals, was Obina, the crown prince, alive. The room fell silent. Even the drums stopped. King Namdi stood up slowly, his hands shaking. "Obina," he whispered. Obina took a step forward, then another. "Yes, father, it's me." The king's voice broke. "My son." Obina bowed deeply, then looked around the room, at Chuka, at Queen Ngozi, at Chief Okoro, at Kamsi. "I did not die," he said clearly. "I was betrayed." The crowd whispered again. Obina held up a folded letter. "This was written by Chinedu, the guard who died in my place. He discovered the plan. He gave his life to protect mine." He turned to the king. "Chief Okoro and his daughter plotted my death, and the child Kamsi is carrying is not mine." A loud gasp swept the hall. Obina continued. "Last night I visited 2 former guards who survived the attack. They saw what happened. They know who gave the order." 2 men stepped forward from behind the curtain. They bowed low. "We were there," one said. "We were paid to keep quiet." "But not anymore." The king looked at Chief Okoro. Chief Okoro stood up. "Lies, all lies." Obina looked him straight in the eye. "Then why did you send men after me?" Okoro's mouth opened. No words came out. Kamsi stood slowly, pale and shaking. I didn't know they would kill him." The king turned to the guards. "Seize them, now." The soldiers moved quickly. Chief Okoro struggled, shouting, "You fools! I built this court! I gave you power!" Kamsi dropped to her knees, crying. As the guards dragged them away, a sharp cry came from the queen's side. Queen Ngozi had fainted. Servants rushed to her, lifting her gently. The king walked toward his son and hugged him tightly. "I thought I lost you forever," he whispered. Obina closed his eyes. "I'm here now, father, and I won't leave again." The court was silent again, but this time, not from fear. This time, from awe. The true prince had returned, and everything was about to change. The palace sent for her the very next morning. Adana, still shaken from the night before, had barely slept. Her mind was full of questions. Obiora walked beside her quietly as two guards led them through the wide palace gates.
Everything was larger than life. Tall pillars, marble floors, golden carvings on every wall. People bowed as they passed, whispering behind their hands. Adana felt out of place, but nothing prepared her for what she saw next. At the end of the long court stood a tall young man in a royal robe, wearing a gold crown and deep red wrapper. Chuka, but not the Chuka she knew. He stood tall, strong, confident, surrounded by elders and nobles. Her breath caught in her throat. He wasn't Chuka. He was Crown Prince Obina, the boy she once shouted at in a village playground, the man she had married without knowing, the one she had trusted with her heart.
He stepped down slowly from the throne and walked toward her. "Adana," he said softly. She shook her head. "No." Tears welled up in her eyes. "You lied to me." "I didn't," he said quickly. "Not at first. I truly didn't know." She stared at him. "But when you remembered, why didn't you say anything?" "I wanted to," he said. "But I was afraid. Afraid you'd leave. Afraid you'd think I used you." "And didn't you?" she whispered. "No." He stepped closer, his voice trembling. "I remembered who I was, but I didn't forget who you were." She frowned. "You're not just Adana," he said gently.
"You're Amara, the girl who stood in front of a prince and told him to be kind. The girl who waited at a bridge for 15 years. The girl who took in a broken man with no name, no past, and no future, and gave him love." Her lips trembled. He held her hand. "I knew who you were before you knew who I was," he said, "and I never stopped loving you." Tears rolled down her cheek. "I didn't fall in love with the crown prince," she whispered. "I fell in love with Chuka." He smiled gently. "Then let me still be him, just for you." She looked into his eyes, full of truth, full of sorrow, full of love.
She didn't speak. She just let her head rest softly on his chest. And for a moment, there were no titles, no palace, no secrets, just two hearts that had finally found their way back to each other. The days after the reunion were both joyful and heavy. Adana stayed in the palace for a short while, walking through the gardens with Obina, laughing again like they did in Eziyama. But the walls were different here. There were eyes everywhere, whispers behind every pillar, and power sitting like a shadow on every plate. One evening, as the moonlight bathed the royal courtyard, Adana spoke softly.
"I love you, Obina, but I don't belong here." He turned to her quickly. "Don't say that." "I do," she whispered. "You have duties, eyes watching you, enemies hiding in corners. I just want to live freely, even if it's not forever. I want to breathe for a little while longer." He looked down. "I'm not leaving because I don't love you," she said gently. "I'm leaving because I do." Obina closed his eyes, then nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. She returned to Eziyama with Obiora, and Obina stayed back in the palace, watching her walk away through the gates with a heart that ached quietly.
He had work to do. The king's health began to fail not long after. He coughed often, his body growing weaker each week. The court doctors said it was his age, but some felt it was the weight of guilt and sorrow. With the king growing weaker, eyes turned again to the throne. Queen Ngozi knew her time was running out. If the king died, Obina would be crowned king. Her son, Prince Chima, would be forgotten. Her dreams would die. One night she called Chima into her chambers, her voice low, her hands cold. "Listen to me," she said. "There is one way left." He hesitated. "Mother, if we don't act now, everything we planned will be lost." Together, they made a dark decision. A few days later, Obina was invited to dine privately with Queen Ngozi and Chima. But what they didn't know was that one of the palace maids who once lived in Eziyama had seen them mixing powder into Obina's food. She ran to the guards, crying, "They are trying to kill Prince." The guards rushed in just as Obina was lifting his spoon. Queen Ngozi froze. Chima jumped to his feet, but it was too late. They were caught. The poison was tested. The cup glowed purple. The court was called at once. The king, though weak, sat in judgment, his eyes full of tears, his voice hard. Queen Ngozi wept. "I did it for my son." Prince Chima remained silent, staring at the ground. The king turned to the guards. "Let it be known across the land, Prince Chima is to be sent to a distant province under watch. He will live, but without title or power. Queen Ngozi shall be sent to the temple at Ulonso. She will spend the rest of her life offering prayers for peace. She will never step into this palace again." No one dared to speak.
Obinna bowed low before his father. "I will protect this kingdom, no matter the cost," he said. And deep inside, his heart longed for only one thing, Adana's smile. A few days later, the sun rose gently over the kingdom of Umweze. The palace gates, once filled with fear and secrets, now opened with calm steps. King Namdi, old and tired, stood before the court one last time. His voice was soft but firm. "I have led this land with no joy, and with mistakes. I know I have done so many wrong things in the past. I think it is now my time to pay for those things," he said. "I have lost a son. I have found him again, and now I choose to rest." He turned to Obinna, standing beside him in a deep red wrapper and crown of white coral beads. "My son," he said, "the throne is yours now. Lead with truth. Lead with heart. Do not let power corrupt you like it did to me." Then the old king stepped down from the royal stool. The guards helped him into a quiet carriage that would take him to Ulonso, the temple where he would spend his last years in atonement. And just like that, Obinna became king. The drums echoed across the villages. From Ajimobi to Eziama, the people danced in the streets. Children threw flowers. Elders blessed his name. But Obinna didn't waste time. He called his court together on his first morning as king. "I do not wear this crown to be feared," he said. "I wear it to bring healing." The court fell silent. Then he spoke. "The marriage decree is abolished. Let no man or woman be forced to marry again in this land." The crowd cheered. "Let Kamsi be exiled to the northern border. She shall live, but without name or honor. Let Chief Okoro be stripped of every title and land. He shall remain in the royal prison until his last breath." The room stayed silent. No one dared to speak. Justice was loud enough. Then Obinna stood and looked around. "There is one more matter," he said gently. "Years ago, a loyal man named General Obi died protecting this kingdom. His name was erased. His family was called traitors." He turned to the court. "That lie ends today." He lifted a scroll and held it up. "I hereby restore the name of General Obi and return the honor to his bloodline. His daughter shall once again be called Lady Amara of Umweze." The crowd gasped. Some wept. Obinna's voice softened. "She is not just a healer's daughter. She is the daughter of a warrior, a girl of truth, and she shall never be hidden again." In the quiet of his room later that night, Obinna stood by the window and stared at the moon. He had waited years for justice. Now it was done. But his heart still reached for one thing. Her. And tomorrow, he would go to her. The next morning, as the sun rose gently over Umweze, a royal carriage rolled down the red dirt path toward Eziama. But inside there were no guards, no drums. Only Obinna, wearing a plain wrapper and a calm smile. He stepped down quietly as the carriage stopped in front of a familiar compound. The birds chirped softly. The wind whispered through the trees. And there she was. Adana, kneeling beside a basket of washed clothes, looked up and froze. Their eyes met. She stood slowly. No one said a word. Then Obinna stepped forward and knelt on one knee. He pulled out a small hand-carved ring and held it out. "Amara, Adana, my heart, my queen," he said, his voice gentle and full. "This time, no lies, no secrets, just love. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes. But her smile said everything. Yes, the wedding shook the kingdom with joy. First,
in the royal palace, where nobles, elders, and villagers all stood together in the great courtyard to witness it. Adana wore a golden wrapper with coral beads around her neck. Obina stood beside her, his eyes never leaving hers. They were crowned king and queen of Umweze. But that wasn't the end. A week later, the celebration moved back to Eziyama. There, under the same tree where they once sat eating roasted yam and laughing like strangers, they married again, this time barefoot, in front of the people who knew their hearts before their names. Old women danced, children sang, even the goats seemed happier. Adana's adoptive father cried as Obina placed the royal wrapper on his shoulders. "From today," Obina announced, "you are an elder in the royal court. Your wisdom has served this land, and your kindness raised a queen." The old man held his chest and bowed deeply. Obiora, standing proudly beside his sister, was also honored. Obina placed a bronze emblem on his chest. "For your courage, your loyalty, and your heart," he said, "you are now commander of the royal guards, and you shall never be far from your sister again." Obiora smiled and hugged his sister tightly. And as they all stood together, Obina, Adana, Obiora, and the people of Eziyama began to fall. Soft, gentle, sweet. The land bloomed once more. The kingdom was at peace. The people were happy. And the king who once lost everything, now had everything that truly mattered. Love, family, home,